presenting. So for tonight's event, we have Professor Paul Chitlik, and he is going to be introduced by his colleague and friend, Mark Scheffler.
Hey, Mark.
Oh, with that kind of applause, to hell with Paul, I think I'll just do this. I was asked to talk about, introduce Paul and his book on writing.
It's rewriting.
Oh, sorry. And to Paul. First of all, I've known Paul quite a long time, many years. We're old friends. He's a man who has been my friend. He's a man who I have worked with and spent lots of time with. And he's a man who, over the course of the years, has been like a sister to me.
Mark, it's brother.
Oh, okay. So
He needs to be rewritten every once in a while.
So what Paul has done, he's written this book on rewriting because Paul has, in addition to having a talent as a writer, Paul has a unique ability to identify issues in a script. And as we learned when we were young writers, it's not good, like I teach in my classes here, I never tell people something is wrong or I believe something is wrong unless I have a way to deal with that. Now I'm looking out and I see a couple of people who were my students in the past. Is this correct? I never say I don't like this or that I have an issue with this unless I can propose a way to fix it. Luckily, with scripts, it's not really rocket science or brain surgery. There is a finite list of problems that can be addressed. And Paul has helped me through the years. When I write myself in my career, I don't show my work to anyone except three. I throw it to three people. I don't show it to my wife. I don't show it to my kids. I don't show it to any. I show it to three people. I show it to a friend of mine who is a casting director because he gives me notes from an actor's point of view. I show it to another very close friend of mine who is a former studio president. He gives me notes based on studio commercial point of view, so I know where I am on that particular staircase. And then I get the most important notes of all, and I only let one person read my work and give me those notes, and that's Paul. Paul is the only person I take writing notes from. I'll take a suggestion from somebody else, but nobody else I've ever seen gets to the heart of it more quickly and more accurately than Paul, which is why he wrote this book, and which is why it is my extreme pleasure to introduce my dear friend for many, many years, Paul Chipman.
Thank you, Mark.
You bet.
One of the funniest men alive, by the way. I wanted to read something to you first that comes from my book, another book, called 39 Steps to Better Screenwriting. And it's called The Second Draft is Killing Me. 39 Steps to Screenwriting is a series of blog posts that I did for scriptshark.com. It's now available in an ebook. I'm not selling that book here tonight. I'm just explaining where it came from. So it says, I got an email this morning from one of my consultees in Australia. I consult for Screen West in Australia and Screen Australia. I had read his first draft about a month ago and sent notes. Last week I sent him an email to see how it was going. No response. Yesterday I sent another, this time saying I was worried about him. Here's his reply and my answer. Hi, Paul. The second draft is killing me. My initial response to the notes was defensive and skeptical. But once I got over that knee-jerk reaction and took a second and third look, I realized that you were right, and I was just being precious. Now my problem is that as soon as I change one element, it has a knock-on effect. In Australia, that means that it's like, yeah, you understand. Never mind. And I find I have to change another part. It's not only discouraging, but also bloody hard work. I find I spend a lot of time staring at the screen in a zombie-like fashion or redoing my income tax. I've never been blocked before, and I don't know how to deal with it. Avoidance works for a while, but eventually deadlines approach, and I still haven't got half as far as planned. agency X, the funding body, want a delivery date, and I don't know what to tell them. It's not finished, and I don't know how to push through to the end. Any advice? And he signed it S. I won't tell you his real name. So, dear S, this type of reaction is not uncommon. Sit down, take a deep breath, and read your current script through again as if you were a development executive at a studio. Be harsh with the writer. Write notes on the sides of the pages. Cross out stuff. Make notes on a sheet of paper. Be sure to do all this on paper, not on the computer. There's a difference. When you're done, write up what you would tell the writer if you were giving notes. Then compare that notes with my notes, which are, by the way, not gospel. Then pretend you're the executive and combine the notes into one document. Then go for a walk or some sort of exercise. When you come back, sit down with that document and read it as if you were the writer. Okay, you might agree with some notes and disagree with others, but your task is to make them work. If you can't make them work somehow, and they don't always work, then just plow through the script doing the ones that do work. When you're done with that, plow through again and do the ones that work, then read the script again. If it works, great. If there are issues, have a look at the notes that you couldn't make work. Do they still apply? Because they might not at this stage. Do you need to do something else? You might. And if you don't know what else to do, now's the time to send it to me again. Then I talk about him calling me up on Skype and working on it. But you have to look at the script as a product, not your left arm or upper intestine. It's something you make, like a new rocking chair. If it doesn't rock, no one's going to sit in it. So somehow you've got to make it rock, and I'm sure you will. So this can happen on any draft. But one of the problems that people have is to decide when they're done with a draft, and then when they're done with the whole thing altogether, and how to get a microphone out of the stand. There we go. Okay, can you still hear me? Yes. All right. So what I'm going to do today is do a quick run-through of how to know when you're done with a draft and how to deal with it. So who's the screenwriter in this room? Good. Who's the novel writer in this room? Same thing applies. Who's the playwright? No playwrights. Okay. The same type of process applies to each one of those things. So that's why I'm calling this approaching the rewrite, not necessarily the rewrite of the script. But it does work for scripts and it does work for novels. So these are the things that you have to read your script for. And as I tell my students, if you're not ready to read your script 8 more times, then nobody's going to be ready to read it once. Because if it bores you after 8 times, and you probably by this time have read it 30 times, I'm thinking 30, 40 times, you must still be interested in it. And at the same time, be able to look at it from the point of view of somebody that's fresh, somebody that doesn't know the script. So the first time you read it through again, you read it for structure. And what I do usually when I give a talk like this is I go through and I show parts of movies that tell you about the structure of a movie. But the structure of a movie has 7 parts, and I'm going to tell you how they lay out with each one of these things. Those are examples that you can look at if you care to write them down, or I can just talk about them a little bit. But the first part of a movie is the ordinary life of the movie. This is when we learn who the character is, the central character. We learn also what that character's problem is, what the character's flaw is. And that's very important, because that's what makes that character human, and that's also what makes us want to follow that character through the arc of his story. And you've heard the expression character arc. I don't know why they call it an arc. It's not a straight line. It's not an arc. It's kind of a left and right and left and right as your character is wandering through the problem that's been set up in this movie that will come in just a second, that he has to deal with or she has to deal with, and by the end, they have made a change. So that's an important thing to remember. If your character hasn't changed from the beginning to the end, then you haven't done your job as a screenwriter. So this first part of the movie is to figure out what's wrong with this person's life, how he's dealing with his life, and what's going on with it. Then the problem occurs. Something from the outside comes and affects your character, and I call that the inciting incident. I'm not the only one that calls it that. A lot of people do. So that's something that comes from the outside and is going to compel your character eventually to make a change, to make a decision. And that's what the end of the Act 1 is. The Act 1 close is when your central character makes her decision about what to do in the future. What is her goal now? That they have to react to the inciting incident in some way. And now they have to create a goal, and not only a goal, but a plan. So I want to find the treasure. How am I going to find the treasure? Well, I'm going to have to go to the library and look up a lot of maps. That would be one way. And of course, that would fail. And that's part of what's going on in the second act, which starts at the end of Act 1, of course, when your character tries many ways to reach his or her goal and fails. Because if they succeed, the movie's over. In a novel, you can go off in a lot of different directions. You can go off in the person's mind, and you can go into the past, you can go into the future, you can go describing a pair of shoes that he's wearing. In a movie, you can't do that. You have to be focusing on the character trying to reach his or her goal and failing. Until the midpoint. And in the midpoint, your character realizes that there's something wrong with her, that she hasn't been able to succeed because she's been too greedy, because she's been too self-effacing, because she's been too brash. Whatever the flaw is that you've chosen for your character, or whatever the character has chosen for you to be the flaw, because that sometimes comes up, well, that's when they realize that. And that's also when something happens again from the outside to force your character to change the direction and to change their goal. And they usually go from what we call a want to a need. You've probably heard that expression. At the midpoint, they go from a want to a need. But what does that mean? That means they go from trying to achieve what they want to trying to achieve what they really need. So it goes from an external goal to an internal goal. So, if, for example, they're looking for a treasure, and they realize at the midpoint that what they really need is the treasure of their own family, then that's when they change their goal to trying to get their family together. It doesn't mean necessarily that they abandon their first goal, but it does mean that the more important goal is the need. And they work towards that, and of course they're going to fail, because if they succeed at that right away, that's the end of the movie. But they're continuing on, they're trying to reach their goal until something happens again from the outside that crushes them, that brings them to their low point, that brings them to the point where they think it's never going to happen, or the audience thinks it's never going to happen, and they go into a deep, deep funk, which some people call the dark night of the soul. Have you ever heard that expression? No? Well, it's a good one, because that's what happens at the low point. They just think, I'm never going to make it, I'm going to give up. But then, again, something from the outside happens to remind them of what their need is, what their real goal is. They could see a picture of their daughter. Their mentor could remind them, as in Star Wars, when Obi-Wan Kenobi says, Luke, you can make it. Whatever he says when Luke's in the fighter. So it's something to remind your character that they have to reach this goal. It's really important. And they bring themselves back up, and they go back out there and they prepare to reach their final challenge. And that would be the biggest scene in the movie. That would be the scene where they go on stage and they help the boy, about a boy, to realize his dream. It's the scene where the guy runs across New York City and runs into the ballroom and proposes. It's the scene where somebody hits the home run that wins the game. Whatever it is that your central character has to achieve to reach his or her goal, that's the scene in the final challenge. And then there's the return to now changed forever normal life. If the character hasn't changed, remember what I said at the beginning, if the character hasn't changed, then it's not really a movie. So the character has to change, and it helps the audience to calm down after a big final challenge to see the character resume life, but to now change forever normal life. So those are the 8 points of the structure. So we were just talking about a review for structure. So you read your whole script for structure, and you make sure that you have those 7 points. And not only do you have those 7 points in the structure of the script as a whole, but you have them in each scene. Each scene also has 7 points. And it would take me too long to show you a clip from Shakespeare in Love, but if we have time at the end, I'll show you. It's a clip of 1 minute and 59 seconds, I think it is. But it's got all the 7 points. It's like a little movie. It's terrific. So each scene has to have structure. So you would read for the structure of the script as a whole, and then the structure of the scene. And then you read each scene for conflict in the scene. Let's see if I have that. No. Okay, I'll go back to that. You read each scene for the conflict and make sure that There is conflict in every scene. But what I haven't told you yet is there are really 4 stories with the 7 points. And this is the scary part. Could you hold this for a second, Carol?
Yes.
It's warm up here.
Oh.
And as my students know, I never wear a jacket in class.
Oh.
So there are 4 main stories going on in every movie. And you've all heard of subplots. These are the main subplots. There are other subplots that happen, but these are the main subplots, the ones that require the 7 points. First of all, there's the main story, your central character's plot, the thing that is talking about the central character's goals. And then there's an emotional story, and I call this the central emotional relationship. Every movie has got one. That is to say, there is sometimes called the love relationship, but it's not always love. It can be a buddy movie. It can be about a father and a son. It can be a father and a daughter, a mother and a daughter. It can be about sisters. Whoever it is about, that's the subplot about the central emotional relationship. And that also follows the 7 points that we've discussed. Then there's the personal growth story. Now that's easy because that's about the flaw. And we watch how the character reacts to the outside world and how things change for him or her in terms of their flaw. How the inciting incident makes their flaw very plain and clear. How the end of Act 1 is something that's going to be a goal. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at a hawk outside there. This is hovering over me.
Pretty amazing,
I'm thinking,
right?
wow. At any rate, it's a personal growth story. And then here's the story that most people don't think about. There's an antagonist story. The antagonist in every movie has got his or her own goals. And when you write a movie, you have to think about that. From the point of view of the antagonist, what is this movie? Does it have 7 points? Now, they're a little different because, let me go back here. If we go back to the ordinary life of the character, quite often we don't see the antagonist in the ordinary life, in his or her ordinary life. The inciting incident could be the antagonist acting on the protagonist, but not necessarily. It could be, and sometimes it's not even a person. It's the weather, it's the volcano, it's the building, whatever it is. But at the end of Act 1, we should know who the antagonist is, and we should know what the antagonist wants. And that's very important. The midpoint is a turning point for the antagonist as well. Things are stepped up. Everything gets a little bit tougher for the protagonist, and the antagonist has increased the pressure on him. That's what's probably brought about the midpoint. And the low point is the opposite. The low point is the high point for the antagonist. This is when the antagonist looks like he or she is going to win, is going to achieve his or her goal, whatever that goal is. And in the final challenge, instead of winning, the antagonist loses. So they have their own story, and they return to normal life. Quite often we don't even see that in a movie, but we should know what happens. The antagonist is defeated. Does she die? Does she change form? Does she go live in Australia? What happens to the antagonist? So those are the review. As you're reviewing your script for structure, those are the things you should be looking for. Now, sometimes when I give a presentation like this, I ask people to do some work, like write the 7 points of their main story. I think that would take too long today, so we're going to pass on that. But if you have a chance, it's a good thing for you to do. In case you're rewriting your script right now, do it from memory. Don't look at your script. Do it from memory. Write the 7 points of your script from memory. And then write the 7 points of the emotional story from memory. Whatever's happening. Oh, by the way, in a romantic comedy, things are switched around. The A story, the most important story, is the emotional story. And the B story is the plot story. Has anybody seen You've Got Mail?
Yes.
All right, it's pretty popular romantic comedy. The B story is about the stores. Is about the expansion of Tom Hanks's chain of stores and about how Meg Ryan is losing her store. But the A story is about Tom and Meg. So that's the way it works in a romantic comedy. And then write the 7 points of your antagonist story. If you can't do that, then you have to go back and read your script and say, where have I gone wrong here? What have I forgotten? And one of the things that you do as you reread your script is read it for dialogue. I think I wrote that back here. Yeah, descriptive paragraphs and dialogue. Let's look at that then from this point of view. To write your dialogue, to review your dialogue, you really need to know who your characters are. So I'm hoping that you've written biographies of your characters. If you haven't, this is a good time to do it before you go into your next draft. And what would you include in your biography? I'm not going to be very original here. I'm going to tell you what Laios Evry said. Laios Evry wrote The Art of Dramatic Writing. I'm sure a lot of you pros have seen that before. And he breaks down character into three parts: the physiology, the sociology, and the psychology. The physiology is pretty obvious. It's what does your character look like? Is he old? Is he young? Is she old? Is she young? What's her race? Does she have long hair? Is she pretty? Is she overweight? Is she underweight? Is she tall? Is she short? Why do we need to know all that? Because people react to the world sometimes according to the way they look. And the world reacts to them according to the way they look. Now, if you weighed 350 pounds and you encountered a door that was very narrow, you would have a very different view of how to enter that door than somebody in this room. So it's something to think about. If you write a character that's very, very overweight, they have a different way of reacting with the world. So that's the physiology. Race plays a big part in that, but it also plays a very big part in the sociology of your character. So we want to know where they're from, where they were born, what language they speak, what their family life was like. Were they raised by a traditional family? Were they raised by a man and another man? Were they raised by a woman and another woman? Were they raised by their grandparents? Do they have siblings? What place are they in the siblings? Were they an only child? All those things are important. Also, where did they go to school? What did they study when they went to school? Did they go to a Catholic, did they go to a parochial school when they were in high school, or did they go to a public school? All these things affect your character. The more you know about your character, the better you're going to write that character in description and in dialogue. And that's what we're looking for here. And then the psychology of the character. Now, this is probably the most important part. This is where we think about what is this character's flaw? Why is this character in this particular position right now? You always have to ask your character, why him, why her, and why now? And the flaw is the answer to that. And what happens to them in the inciting incident is the other answer to that. So your character is reflected in his or her dialogue. So one of the exercises I ask people to do sometimes is to write down what's your character's earliest memory expressed in his or her language. That's to say, the way that person talks. So if the person talks and says, you know, what I really liked when I was a kid, was this, then you have to write it like that, if that's the character that you're writing. Or if your character is a physicist, then you would have to write it in that character's language, what that character would say in a normal conversation. Then I would also ask you to write, from your character's point of view, how did God create the world? And some of my students say, the ones that have been in my screenwriting class, do you remember, did we do this exercise in our class? I don't think so. Probably not. But I wish I had. How did this character think, what does this character think about the way the world was created? And a lot of students say, no, there is no God. I go, okay, well then how was the world created? Write me one sentence in your character's view about how the world was created. And it gives you a very definite insight into who that character is. And then what's the defining line of your character? What is the defining line? It tells you who your character is in one line of dialogue. For example, I'm a better man as a woman than I was as a man. Who said that? Tootsie. And doesn't that tell you the whole movie right there? And that person's whole character? Because he realized that he was an asshole as a man. And it wasn't until he became a woman that he realized all the things that occur to women, how he should be treating women and other people, as a matter of fact. How about this line? Make my day. Doesn't that tell you everything about the Clint Eastwood character? It does. Because it means, I'll shoot you. As a matter of fact, I'd love to shoot you. That'd be great. So don't tell me the truth. Don't give it up. Let me shoot you. And that's a pretty scary thought. So if you know the defining line of a character, it helps you get a real clue as to their dialogue. Now, antagonists have this too. How about, I'll be back? Doesn't that tell you everything about the Terminator? That's all you need to know. He's coming back. You can't stop him. That's a scary thing too. Okay, so these are some of the things you should look for. Same thing applies to your antagonist, but here's something different. Instead of looking for the flaw of the antagonist, look for the antagonist's human quality. Because if your antagonist has a human quality, it makes her scary. Just think about Hitler. That's a pretty scary character. And all I have to do is say the word Hitler. What'd you say?
A wonderful dancer.
He was a wonderful dancer. And he loved his dogs. Have you ever seen pictures?
He poisoned them to test the poison.
Right, and other than that, he loved his dogs. He also loved Eva Braun enough to get married to her just before he killed her.
The bullet was a wedding gift.
Was it silver or gold for that one? I don't know. Okay. Anyway, if your character has a human quality, then he or she becomes more real, and that's an important thing. And then I asked people to write a recent dream in one line that that character had, and that could scare you, because then the character will start to speak through you. And that's what I really want to see when you're doing a rewrite. I want your characters to speak through you. Now, we've talked about scenes. Some other things that need to be done when you read your scenes is not only for the scene structure, and not only for the conflict, you have to make sure that the people in the scene each have a goal. Because otherwise, they're not going to have conflict. If you have two people in your scene, they should have different goals. And it doesn't have to be they're in a big fight. They're not boxers. It could be, I want Chinese food tonight, and I would rather have Mexican. So there's a conflict. It's not a huge conflict, but it's a conflict. And we learn about our characters by the way they deal with the conflict, by the way they deal with the other people in the scene, by the way they pursue their goals. And each character, as they enter a scene, as they begin a scene, and your actors are going to want to know this, each character has to have an emotion. They start off the scene happy, they start off the scene sad, they're crying, they're laughing, they're depressed. And it will stay that way until something occurs to them to change that. And that would generally be the inciting incident. And did I say conflict? Yes, I meant conflict again. Every scene has to have conflict. The number one thing that new writers forget in their scenes is conflict. Right, Mark?
Absolutely.
There we go. Okay. So, one of these 8 passes that you have to give your script to find out if you're ready to move on or stop is to see if it's too long. And I'm going to tell you right now that every first draft is at least 10% too long, except for my first drafts, which are 10% too short. I'm not sure why that happened, but as an old executive producer of mine used to say, life is too short, and so am I. But looking for cuts, that's what you've got to do. You want to make sure that every scene moves the story forward. If it's a scene that's really funny, but doesn't move the story forward, you really should cut it. If it's a scene that makes you cry, but doesn't move the story forward, you still should cut it. You have to make sure every scene is moving your story, and that every scene tells something about your central character. Take out those scenes that don't have conflict, or figure out what the conflict is and put the conflict in that scene. They might be having dinner and they're talking about their experiences in college, but they're just talking about their experiences in college. So maybe the one would say, well, you shouldn't have done that. And the other would say, well, what if I did? What's wrong with that? So now we have a little conflict. That's what's interesting about a scene, is when we have conflict between the characters. And then it's very easy to make cuts by cutting the heads and tails off the scene. That means cutting a little bit at the beginning, which is sometimes called throat clearing. If you have people saying, hi, how are you? I'm fine. What have you been doing today? Nothing much. What have you been doing? Nothing much. That's throat clearing. We don't need that in a scene. Just get right into, what are you thinking? And go from there. So you can also cut off the tails. You can cut off the return to normal life in a scene, because we'll generally figure out what that is if we go to the next scene and we see what the situation of that character is. All right, then there's the pass for presentation. I call this the Mercedes-Benz pass. And the reason I call it that is, if you buy a new if you walk into a Mercedes showroom, and there's 2 500 SEs or whatever they're called on the floor, brand new. Their list price is about $105,000 last time I looked. It's a lot of money. I mean, I would never spend that, but okay. It's a lot of money for a car, but people buy them, right? Now, if there's one of those that's in perfect condition, it's brand new, it was protected all the way from Germany, it looks like you could eat off of it, that'd be great. You'd spend $105,000 if you had it on that car. If you had another one, it was also brand new, but it wasn't as well protected. It got nicked, and a couple of stones hit it when it's on the freeway, and the steering wheel's in upside down, and the radio's missing a knob, and the gear shift lever's scratched. You'd say, I'm not going to spend $105,000 on that. I'm going to spend it on the one that's pristine, right? Wouldn't even be a question for you. Now, if you turn in a script and you didn't check it for spelling or punctuation or grammar, and there are a lot of typos, what do you think people are going to think about? They're going to think they're not going to take it, because they have a choice. Because a brand new script in a in a high budget movie, and high budget still says $5 million or more, is about $105,000. So they're about to spend the same amount of money that you were going to spend on the Mercedes. They're not going to want one that's damaged. Now, I tell this story, and I told it often, that I had a student a couple of years ago that was a graduate student, and she misspelled her name on the title page. Now, what do you think a reader's going to think when they see that? They're going to think, you know what? I've got a lot of reading to do today. I'm just going to put that aside. And that's what they do. Trust me. So, the thing that you want to walk out of this room with, I hope, is a rewrite plan. Now, here's a lot of things that I'm asking you to do. But if you take a picture of it like this young lady is doing, which is a great idea, it's much faster than writing notes, so please go ahead and do that, then you will have a plan for your rewrite. And everybody's got a rewrite. By the way, does anybody have an idea how many rewrites it takes to get to the stage, to get to the sound stage? Mark? As many as it takes. And how many is that? On average, I asked this at a Writers Guild question and answer with a lot of really great writers. And it's John Sacred Young. Do you know John Sacred Young? Jane Anderson, these people. They all said, 25 to 30. 25 to 30 drafts. Now, not all of them are going to be major changes. Sometimes you're just going to change a name, you're going to change a place name, you maybe have to make a cut because the budget's not going to fit that the World War II that you had planned out here. So you might have to make some changes for that. But this is a good plan for you if you can see these things. Write a bio for everybody. Reread the script, take notes on everything as I discussed. Do a new beat sheet, and that will help you formulate what you need to do on your next draft. Write new pages or rewrite the old ones, and reread the script, taking notes on all the subjects above. That's a lot to do, I realize that. But, that's what we have to do. So that is the end of this presentation. You should be ready to do your rewrite, right? Right. Okay. And if you'd like to buy the book, it's more explained in there, and that young gentleman will take your money. But if you'd like to ask a free question, please do.
Free question.
Free questions. Anybody have a free question? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm working on a pilot for a sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
I am completely neophyte. I'm a professor here, and I do all this research and academic journals and that kind of crap. So it's completely not like this in some ways, but it still does tell a story.
Right.
So do the same principles apply to something like what's going to be a series of
Absolutely.
like 30-minute or 20-minute little
Right.
things?
If you're writing a sitcom for network TV, it's going to be 22 minutes and 30 seconds long.
Yes.
And it has a slightly different structure, but the 7 points are there. And usually the easiest way to describe the structure of a sitcom is there's a problem, which we introduce in the cold open or the tease, and that problem becomes a bigger problem at the midpoint, and they have to solve it. Your central character has to solve
That
it.
happens every single
time.
as it were.
Every single time. The 7 points are there. They can be found there. But this is the simplest way to describe a sitcom structure. And scenes are the scene. They're exactly the same, except they're funny. So is it harder or easier to write a dramatic play or a comedic play? It's harder to write the comedy, isn't it?
I don't know.
Oh,
when I
well,
tell
okay.
these stories on what it's based, people are just in hysterics.
Uh-huh.
So the challenge is, how do I translate the way I'm telling it to have people rolling on the ground in the writing? So that's part
Okay,
of
well, I'll direct you to, first of all, a class with Mark Scheffler, who teaches
Yes,
comedy writing here.
yes.
And also a book called Elephant Bucks. Do you ever use that, Mark? No. There's a book written by a very successful comedy writer named Sheldon Bull, and it's called Elephant Bucks, and that'll give you a start.
Elephant Bucks. Great. Thank
Bucks, B-U-C-K-S.
Can I ask you a question, please? Is your show single camera or multi-camera? Because the scenes are written differently.
you.
for
Right.
those two.
I don't know that yet. I haven't decided that. Let's decide that.
And you need to decide that.
Yeah.
Because that gives you the look of your show and the pace of your show.
Okay.
Single camera shows are paced differently than multi-camera shows are.
Thank
Multi-camera shows are more like a theatrical presentation, like a play. The scenes are longer, and in single camera film, the scenes are shorter, much more resembling a small movie.
Great.
Sorry.
Right. And very good. And also, they're shot. You've done this before. They're shot before a live audience, so there's 3 walls, and the live audience is the 4th wall. In a single camera, you don't have to do that. So you can shoot any way you want to do that, and so it opens it up a lot more. And also, in a 4 camera, you have to have laugh breaks, so you have to wait for the laughs to come. So you pace it in a different way.
Spread.
Last spread, thank you. I couldn't think of the word then. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
My first draft always comes in 10% too short. And since you seem to do the same thing, do you have any idea why that is?
Because I'm in a hurry. So I want to get it done. So when I put it aside for a week or 2 and come back to it and I read it over and take notes, I figure out what needs to be expanded, where I didn't explain enough, or I didn't have the characters explained enough, or explain is a bad word. I didn't have enough conflict so that they could show who they are. I didn't have enough steps to reaching a goal. So I usually find that I just didn't write enough. And there might be missing scenes, or maybe a scene is not developed enough. So I have to work on developing the scene more to make it fit. You want to have, on a first draft, most people write long, and they would write, for a 110-page screenplay, they might write 130 pages. I write 80. And then I have to make it get up to 95 or 100, and which is where you want it to be, really, these days. You want about 100, 110 pages. Unless you're Frank Darabont and you write Green Mile, which is 185 pages. So, another question? Yes, sir.
Trying to figure out how to phrase this. So this is a standard Hollywood screenplay.
Correct. There are other ways to do this.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you.
Okay.
If you do this and you suddenly discover, I want to do something more Birdman-like, for instance.
Birdman has 7 points, but yes, if
Yes,
you want to do
that's
something a little
but
wilder.
It doesn't quite have the same sort of. It
Right.
doesn't feel as structured because it has almost a jazzy kind of improv feel to it,
Exactly.
as opposed to American Sniper. that
Sniper,
has-
it's got all those points.
Yeah.
As opposed to Melancholia, excuse
Yes.
me, which doesn't have 7 points. And also is a very depressing movie. And it
Yes,
ends on a
it's
low
very
point rather than a high point. And it's depressing for a reason, because Lars von Trier is depressing and depressed. But yes, there are many other ways to write a movie. There's the French way where everybody commits suicide at the end. There's a German way where everybody's depressed again. There's the Indian way. By Indian I mean East Indian. There's a Spanish way. And there's the 12-point structure, which would take me too long to describe, but it's the one that's used in Star Wars. So it's the mythic structure, where you have a different approach to things. Now, at the same time, you can still find the 7 points in the mythic structure. The Wizard of Oz also has the mythic structure, which is fascinating to me, because no one had discussed what the mythic structure was at that time. And we have to remember, too, that in the 20s and 30s and 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, there were no screenwriting books that describe what this standard 3-act structure was for an American screenplay. But yes, you're right. I'm talking about Hollywood screenplays. I recommend that you dominate this form first, and then branch out and write something a little different. But even a little different, like Memento. Remember Memento? It's told backwards, but it's told using the 7 points. They're all there. And the story, there's 2 stories told at the same time. The one in color is told backwards, the one in black and white is told forwards. That also has 7 points. It just is the format that we as Western readers and moviegoers and playgoers have come to expect. The 3-act structure's been around for 2,500 years.
It's
That's
back
when
to
we use
classic Greek drama.
classic Greek drama.
It's an extrapolation of Greek amphitheater drama
Mhm.
that was what Shakespeare called upon, and then that translated into playwriting, what became modern playwriting. And then when the mediums of film and television evolved, they bastardized it again for their particular purpose, and that's how we got to where we are. But that's what Paul was saying. While this being, this screenplay character was being evolved, there were no textbooks. It's an art form that evolved out of basically necessity and adaptation. And then, once it solidified and became an entity that could be addressed, people started addressing it.
There's another thing I wanted to address while you were talking about that, and that is a typical Hollywood film. People think a typical Hollywood film has a happy ending, right? But it doesn't necessarily have a happy ending. It has an ending where your central character reaches his or her goal. So if you look at Gladiator, for example, and who's seen Gladiator here? Okay, pretty common film. I thought it was a really good film. One of the reasons it was good is your central character, even though he dies, in the end, reaches his goal, which is to reunite with his family and to kill the emperor, right? So he reaches both of his goals, the inner goal and the outer goal, the need and the want. He needed to reach his family. That was his most important goal. He wanted to kill the emperor. So that is a typical Hollywood movie. Now, a typical French movie is different. And it's okay to make those kind of movies. But the reason why Hollywood movies open big in China is because this type of movie works. And people feel better when they walk out of the cinema than when they went in. And that's part of what we try to do. Part of what they're trying to do, for example, I'm consulting with Hunan Broadcasting right now. That's the second, you're familiar with it, right? It's the second largest broadcasting group in China. They want to know how to write Hollywood television, because their television doesn't export. Nobody watches Chinese television outside of China. Nobody watches Russian television outside of Russia. Everybody watches American television. Everybody. So they want to know how to make it. And the way we make it is this. It's what I just described. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
If you're not writing a feature, but let's say a short, like a 15 to a 30-minute short, then would the same approach apply, or would you change it?
There are two views on that. Well, there are more than two views. There is the view that this approach works. The 7-point structure works on short, and that's what I teach in my short classes. But there are ways to do it as well where it doesn't exactly work that way. I also wrote many Twilight Zone episodes in the 80s. 22-minute short. But it didn't have a positive ending, always. Sometimes it did, but it didn't always have a positive. Sometimes at the end of one of those, you were scared out of your mind. Or, yep, we all still remember those. Or you thought, oh, that's depressing. Or, damn, that happened to him. I'm sorry about it. Even the pilot was the first Twilight Zone pilot was a guy who loved reading, and he gets locked into a vault where there's nothing but books, and he breaks his glasses. So there's that. So it doesn't always have to be that way. A short can have a surprise ending like that and still be effective.
But does it still have an A story and a B story?
It doesn't have time for all that, usually.
Yes, so
Usually you have time for the main story, maybe a B story. The B story would be the central emotional relationship. Maybe you have time for an antagonist or not. I mean, you should have an antagonist, but sometimes things are antagonists or situations are antagonists in short. You have to decide. It's a different world altogether, really. But every scene is going to have the 7 points, even if you don't show them on screen. They will have something that you know had happened before that, and something that happens after that. Sometimes there's even ways to take out the middle of a scene, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Does that answer your question?
yes, it does.
Good, okay. Any others? Okay, well, there's beer and wine and food in the back, so please enjoy. And thank you for coming.